Dust moved sideways in the hollow, drawn by the wind's tired hand brushing against rails silvered by time and western sun. The house, lean silent, stood apart from the road, its boards sagging with the burden of seasons stacked one atop another. Morning pressed down pale and blue, a hush holding the valley broken only by the distant bark of a dog or the clatter of wind-loosened tin. He stood at the fence line, boots sunk deep in last summer's dry earth, one gloved hand curled around a split cedar rail. There was no visible sign of yesternight's mercy, no footprints, no shadow cast, save his own. Yet his whole body leaned into memory, shoulders drawn, head lowered. Habit made him check the horizon. Out there beyond the chokeweed, the land sloped into hard grass, and farther still the cut bank. Inward he moved slow, time measured by the clean snap of a match, the sigh of breath leaving lungs scored by dust and regret. Each gesture heavy, the unhurried raking of ashes from the stove, fingers trailing through cold iron. Law rode quiet alongside a man's life here, never absent, never seen. Ghosts old as the land gathered at his back. Father's voice, winter's hunger treaties unsaid. He kept them at bay by labor, by silence, but they pressed near when the wind paused and the door creaked. A loose nail snapped beneath his boot. He bent to right it, knuckles mottled by past work, by the slow disgrace of feeling too much for strangers. Eyes traced the horizon, uneasy searching, then returned to the dust as if there in the dry, shapeless hollow forgiveness or warning would rise. He drove the nail home, the echo ringing faint. No one answered. Only wind and dust circling, marking a line no border could hold. Light shifted in bands across the prairie, uncertain, lingering at the rims of thorn and buffalo grass. The days here stretched long taut with their own silence, the land settling into its ancient quarrels, earth buckling away from shallow riverbeds, cottonwoods clutching at the banks. There was a hush beneath all movement, as if the ground itself weighed what must remain unsaid. He rode the long, slow arc south of the house, where creek water trickled thin beneath the old stone bridge. A crow circled in the shale blue sky, its shadow stitching black across brown. His cattle clustered by the far fence, knowing trouble in the weather before a man could taste it on the air. Each hoofball pressed stories deeper. Old wrongs, bargains cut in dry seasons, the price of water not always paid in coin. Law did not ride bold here. It seeped like cold through boot soles, an understanding more than a rule. Sometimes it was a mark on a map. Sometimes it was a grave sunken and unmarked. A neighbor's laughter, once brittle in the wind, now stilled. Memory of a badge, laid aside in anger. He dismounted, hands slow to leave the leather posture, careful, as if the earth might notice any sudden shift. Cicadas whispered from the grass, a distant thunder pressed warning behind the hills. In his chest, a tightness acquired from years of looking away, when justice blurred, when kindness came with a cost no one wished to tally. He knelt by the creek's edge. The water was cold, barely moving, reflecting nothing but sky. Yet his hand hovered above it, unmoving shadow cast across the surface. For a moment his body made a bridge between earth and water, past and present, before hunger, before tribes drew lines with blood and iron. All around him the hush thickened tight as a promise waiting for the breach. Dusk bled slow across the hollow light gold, and then nothing settling into the wire's hush. The sky turned bruised dark above cottonwoods, and the hush that had clung to the valley all day deepened, heavier now as though waiting for something to break. Wind ran long fingers through the fence grass. Somewhere a lark called once, then folded itself into silence. He saw her approach only in the periphery, a filament between worlds small against the dying light. She moved with difficulty, each step measured, leaned into the fence, braced as if the field might tilt and spill her into emptiness. Her dress torn at the hem caught on the lower wire. She freed it without cry or complaint. Dust clung to her skin, hair matted where sweat had dried and then turned cold. He did not speak. Sound risked the shape of things. Instead, he let his hand find the dented canteen at his side, thumbed the cap slow, hesitation in every motion, law and memory heavy at his back. He offered it across the woven wire, an arm outstretched, his own shadow fusing with hers in the lee of the fading sun. She took the metal in both hands, knuckles bright as bone, and drank. Her eyes were downcast, watching her fingertips for tremor or betrayal. His breath caught tight in the chest, the dusk carrying the secret away. In that long waiting pause, neither reaching nor retreating, the whole valley seemed to hold its exhale, the last light on fence posts, wind cupping a tangle of black hair, his hand left suspended in the emptiness between mercy and the law. Silence drew taut around them, a hush not empty but full, dense as riverbank mud after rain. The metal in her hands was battered, glinting dully in twilight. He watched the water slide along her jaw, catching in the hollow of her throat, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed just the slow measure of her drinking. His feet, rooted behind the fence's branchwork, the crickets steady ticking in the fruit, weeds. His hands, rough scarred the knuckles slow healing from winters past, held the wire steady as she drank. What passed over between them was not just water, but the bare and silent weight of choice. Behind him, history pressed stories of men hanged for fraternizing, sermons about property, and the seep of law into marrow. Yet the rules curled and burned in his chest, dry as last year's grass. He did not flinch. He did not look away. As she lowered the canteen, her breath trembling on lips, cut and chapped. She held it out uncertain. For a moment their hands met over the wire, his warm from the sun's last memory, hers cold as the river before spring. The exchange was wordless, an old ritual older than any border, mercy against caution, faith against the gathering dark. He accepted the empty canteen nod, just perceptible in the falling gloom, then turned away, shoulders rigid, jaw set not in regret or hope, but in the knowledge that there would be consequence, and that consequence was now part of him as wind is part of dust. The first star appeared sharp and unstinting above the land's long hush. Darkness poured in slow and certain, as if the sky itself had been overturned. With night, the plains loosened their secrets. Every hollow spoke in wind-gathered tongues. Each fence post became a sentry. The frost smell deepened. The porch lamp burned low, and the house pressed inward, shrinking against the immensity that edged closer with each falling degree. He moved through the chores with a distracted precision, bucket to corral feed scattered in the hush. Hoofbeats sounded far off, or perhaps only in memory, at each sudden cry of a night bird, his shoulders stiffened, hands heavy working by lantern's weak glow. From the barn door he could see nothing but shifting dark and the pale ghost of his own breath. The wire where their hands had met earlier glimmered briefly, catching stray starlight, a mark not even the wind would meddle with. Inside, he sat at the table, untouched food grown cold. With each hour, the boards seemed to groan more rafters, trading burdens with the walls. He pulled the rifle from the shadows, checked its weight, not from need, but from the old shape of habit, ritual inherited from those who worried about the wrong kind of mercy. From beyond the fields, coyotes yapped and fell silent. He watched the light die across the floorboards, long shadows trembling the edge of the empty canteen, glinting on the windowsill, a mute witness guarding the hush between trespass and dawn. The moon carved its way through clouds, casting long, uncertain shadows across the plank floor. His boots, kicked off and forgotten by the door, looked shrunken in the pale light, as if childhood itself might pool there in oil-dark puddles only he could see. Wind pressed at the window, rattled the sill, made the whole house shift ever so slightly on its haunches. The rafters spoke in slow complaint boards, answering one another in a language of bone-deep fatigue. He sat unmoving, elbows digging into the scarred table, hands wrapped round the empty cup he could not bring himself to fill. Somewhere a hinge groaned. The old house, remembering every secret, kept every promise, bent by hunger, by winter, by stubborn pride. The girl's hand haunted his palm, the memory of her grip, that transfer of cold and hope. Each time his knuckles flexed, it was as if he could still feel the fine tremor of her life in his own. The dog rose and padded to the threshold, lay down with its snout pressed to the crack under the door, as if also listening for what pressed in from outside. His eyes found the canteen on the windowsill rim, silvering where her mouth had touched. Remorse settled slow and grainy behind his ribs, a tide that moved only beneath the skin, never breaking the quiet of the house. He shut his eyes, and in the hush the boards creaked again. Slow, irregular, a rhythm the house made for sleepless men and memory's echo. Outside the wind shifted, finding one loose shingle, making it tap, 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 a counting that neither eased nor accused, but kept him awake through the long pull of night. Dawn seeped pale and slow, a thin wash of gold drifting across frost-stiffened grass, catching in every wrinkle of land. He woke to the hush that came before hard weather, the dog already pacing belly low, as if the air itself were stranger. He drew on his boots, movements careful, habit, not hope. The door swung open with a resigned groan, and cold bit sharp against his cheeks. Out beyond the barn, a line shimmered, not smoke or sunlight, but movement cast long and low, the horizon swelling with it. First the wind, carrying a new note rhythm broken by hoof and breath. His hand rested on the post, as if he could steady the trembling earth itself. Horses stood shoulder to shoulder in the dawn's hush, warriors, painted with story and memory, silence hanging heavy between them. 500 by his quiet count. They ringed his cattle fences, faced his lone house with backs straight and steel-bright eyes set on him. Colors flashed in the rising sun, beadwork wool patterns older than paper or plow. No word carried, but something ancient unfurled across the pasture, as inevitable as floodwater after thaw. He felt the weight, the thin wood at his back, the emptiness along his belt, the echo of a canteen left drying in the kitchen window. He did not reach for his rifle. He simply breathed cold and steady, and looked to the lead horse, waiting for a sign, an accusation, or a mercy he did not deserve. Behind him the house watched, silent and shivering in the half-light before him. The world shifted the line between trespass and forgiveness, clear as hoofprint in frost. Frost held fast through the grass, white lace at the foot of each post, brittle silence ringing from hoof to wire. The warriors formed a perfect horizon, more than men, a living wall, shoulders locked with memory, eyes mirror bright beneath the cold dawn. Their faces bore the earth's quiet anger, that old grief carved by treaty and riverbank hunger and night. He moved down the steps, boots slow on frosted wood, each creak of timber swallowed by watchful quiet. The air was stiff and thin, his own breath a pale flag in the hush. He did not reach for his hat, did not cover his eyes. He knew what respect cost here, where names echoed long after voices were gone. At the lead, an elder sat high in the saddle blanket striped with shadow and promise. His silence was weight itself, older than all laws printed or sworn. A wind stirred, and feathers on the lances bent, as if bowing to something unspoken, a reverence neither hostile nor forgiving. The land itself seemed to draw tight, caught between thaw and freeze, forgiveness and justice. Behind him, the house watched. Before him, generations gathered in the shape of men, each one carrying the weight of ancestors, knuckles white on reins, waiting to see if he would flinch or offer. He stood with hands open, palms empty above the brittle grass, his heart beating loud in the hush. In that hush, every old promise and trespass came home, circling like dusk or inheritance drawn into the raw morning light, awaiting reckoning. The sun found no warmth as it rose, light brittle as mica, glancing off the frost-bitten earth. In the ring of riders, silence reigned thick as buffalo hide, a silence not empty, but loaded with years and things left unsaid. He stood just beyond the shadow of his own roof boots, rooted coat open to the cold. When he glanced up, every eye was waiting, unwavering, neither invitation nor dismissal in their gaze. The elder, bearing a white scar across his cheek, shifted in his saddle. His hand tightened once on the rein, the gesture spare as prayer. Between the two, wind crossed the field, threading the pale grasses, lifting a single errant feather that drifted up and down, the only thing moving in all that frozen world. A word might have shattered it, but none came. Instead, the weight of what was owed pressed into the rancher's frame, the girl's thirst, the law's sharp edge, the past humming in the bones of everyone gathered. He tried to clear his throat. The wind caught the sound, made it smaller. A younger rider near the front spat once, boots scarring the frost, then glared at the horizon, jaw locked. His message was plain enough. With both hands open at his sides, the rancher let the breeze claim his hat, let it tumble out into the long blue. He did not chase after, only met the eyes of those who bore down on his soul, and in the hush something wordless rose, as if the land itself was pleading for an end, for justice, for mercy, twisted with sorrow. In the quiet, every stare became a question, every silence its own wound. His chest ached, not from fear, but from how long the air held between them, waiting for someone, anyone, to break or bend. Metal glinted slow along saddles and belts, guns low, not drawn but never far from being so. The men in the ring had the look of soldiers and ghosts. Both some wore uniforms faded blue or gray, others wore broadcloth stitched with stories, every thread a memory, every bullet a bargain yet to be called in. The rancher felt the shape of his own rifle back in the house, the knowledge of it heavy as a regret he could not shoulder even as his hands ached to remain empty. Across the circle, young men flexed fingers near holstered iron eyes, hard and hungry for some sign, some trespass small or large enough to ignite all the old battles again. Guns were not brandished. There was no swagger, only the knowledge that violence here belonged to the soil as much as the wheat and stone. He saw an older warrior, Line's deep hair silvered, rest his palm atop a revolver. Then, as the wind shifted, let it drift away, hand opening in the space between. The gesture was not surrender or threat, only a momentary easing mercy flickering through the cold. Everyone here carried something: vengeance, memory, hunger, sorrow. The triggers always close. No word passed, but every muscle braced against old fears, rekindled alliance, shifting like low clouds above the frost-bound plain. The rancher's pulse matched the slow beat of hooves, threat, warning, promise. Never released, only recognized over and over. He did not flinch, he held their gaze. The plains breathed in that tension, and the world seemed to wait for the moment the old war would choose its stake, or else relent just long enough for something new to root in the scorched waiting ground. From the porch of the ruined house at the pasture's edge, the widow watched, arms folded to hold the wind at bay, her profile cut by morning's pitiless light. She was a woman built on lean years. Her dress, sun-faded hands knotted strong as hickory roots, eyes narrowed by storms, survived. The world had set her apart, but never apart enough not to see echoes of her own loss rewritten in every reckoning that stitched the prairie like scars. She counted the silent figures, read the tilt of their heads, the hunger in their waiting. She saw the rancher where he stood alone, saw how the earth itself divided. Old war on one side, lone mercy on the other. She carried her own secrets, a husband's grave along the creek, children grown ghost quiet after fever, a hunger not sated by vengeance or law. Her gaze drifted to the circle's edge, lingered on a rider with a bead-strung pouch, whose father once traded her family salt and buckskin ahead of the treaty lines. Memory ran like rivers beneath her skin, debts owed, debts forgiven, and the perilous flickering trust between survivors. She did not call out. Her strength was not in words, but in bearing witness. The way her shoulders did not bend, the way her chin lifted against wind and accusation alike. Some among the gathered glanced toward her, the rare bond of shared famine or shared birth flashing in the whites of their eyes, then shuddered again. As the standoff deepened, her hand drifted to her heart, a habit half prayer, half warning, fingers curled in the fabric above her ribs, an old pledge unspoken. In her silence, the past and present braided together, and the wind seemed for a moment to pause at her threshold. The cold seemed to sharpen in the space between the two circles, one of kin, one of conscience. The warriors fanned out a shield of silence, feathers trembling where the wind traced its own border. At the center, the elder dismounted, dust rising up to his knees, every movement deliberate, drawn out, as if recalling 100 other judgments played in the dirt and dawn. The rancher met him halfway, boots crunching, frost hands exposed. No lawman's badge pinned his chest, no flag rose behind him. He stood as he was, an outsider to every code except his own hard-learned mercy. The breeze caught the hem of his coat, setting it flapping in a rhythm old as morning songs. The elder drew a line in the earth with a willow branch, dark furrow against white, then offered it across, neither invitation nor threat, but a demand for testimony. The rancher's jaw worked a struggle in silence. There were words for trespass, fewer for grace, and he let none of them pass his lips. Instead, he stooped, pressed his palm into the rough marked dust, filling the lines of his hand until it matched the earth. Behind him, the warriors waited across the yard. The widow's gaze did not waver. Their laws pressed close. One legacy rusted with spurs, the other tempered in fire and winter. Judgment did not thunder here. It settled with the willow, with each breath drawn with the weight of hands and with the hush before any verdict is spoken. In the strange, fragile peace that followed, the wind dropped, leaving them suspended for one long beat in the pause where justice and mercy learned the other's name. The hush that followed wound tight, as brittle as the frost itself. Then from the weave of mounted bodies a young chief stepped forward, barely a man, his braids neat, coat red with the faint pattern of war. He moved like someone carrying many eyes upon his back. Each stride across the broken grass stole the warmth from morning. A scar ran like a question beneath his left ear, a mark gifted by fire or blade or birthright. He paused before the line, chin raised, not in pride, but in necessity. His gaze passed first to the elder, finding gravity, then flicked to the rancher, measuring. The silence thickened, stretched near rupture. The warriors braced, wary against treachery in their own ranks. Old wounds burned hottest where kin and new law crossed. He spoke, voice drawn taut as a fiddle string. "She lives," was all he gave, syllables raw and low. Then, like a knife drawn under the skin, came a flicker of betrayal. He revealed in gesture, not word, that another trusted had led the dying girl toward the fence, seeking mercy not from his own people but from this uncertain man. Tension sharpened, a flash of eyes, the grind of hooves. Judgment quivered and nearly broke. The chief turned then, broad shoulders blocking further threat, a shield born of youth and battered trust. He raised a hand, and the ring of riders shifted with a new, uneasy purpose. In the silence, his stand became its own kind of testimony, part accusation, part deliverance, caught between the weight of blood and the cracked promise of water shared. A wind cut through just then, raising grains of dust in a slender spiral circling all three, the elder, the rancher, and the boy who had for a moment turned reckoning upon himself. The ground stilled beneath so many eyes, the air drawn taut as a noose about to break even the wind. The tireless, impartial judge paused at the edges of the circle. Where anger might have flared, an older hush settled thick and unyielding as river clay. Frost still clung to the grass, but the moment quivered warm with something almost dangerous, a mercy being weighed, its cost measured in every heart beating beneath wool and leather. The rancher said nothing. His hand moved slow toward his belt, not for gunmetal but for the battered canteen teeth, marks bright on its rim. He held it out, arms steady, despite the rawness in his gut. In the growing light, water sloshed true and silver, a sound softer, more binding than any word. The young chief approached, hesitating, as if the ground itself might split with this gesture. He took the canteen, fingers brushing the rancher's ungloved and trembling, and for a breathless span they stood, joined by the simple, ruinous kindness pressed between their hands. No words sealed the act, only the weight of memory, the watching of kin and enemy alike, and the knowledge they could not reclaim the laws of before. The warriors watched the exchange with unreadable eyes. The canteen passed not as a trophy, but as a covenant, a shared scarcity, a silent treaty inked in dust and need. The chief lifted it toward his people, not as victory or humiliation, but as proof water given in drought, honor in a world gone hard with inheritance. The moment lengthened, delicate grave, until it broke the two men stepping back, leaving a trace in the frost, a cooling bridge between solitudes. The sky at last seemed to exhale. The circle broke like winter's last ice, fracturing not with thunder but with a creeping, fateful hush. Riders wheeled their mounts away, hooves muffled in thawing dirt, a retreat as solemn as arrival. The land they left behind seemed changed, swept broad and bare as a field, after fire its wounds visible but its promise stirring beneath. Grass bent slow to rise. The dog limped from under the porch, sniffing the trampled earth, where so many had gathered, where silence was bargained for at dawn. He watched them go from behind the rail alone but less unmoored, felt the heat where another's hand had rested, the ghost weight of the canteen in his palm, a memory cut fresh into morning skin. The wind moved easier now, shorn of bitterness, cupping the old house in gentle hands. He noticed the fence, where it had sagged from so many leaning bodies, a crooked line now honest with its history. No cheer broke the departure, no word passed for what had held or broken there. Only the widow's gaze across the fields, unspeaking but softer, and the faint trace of hoofprints threading out toward the river's edge, a mark of peace fragile as newborn grass. He gathered the scraps of the past hours, the scuffed dirt, the pressed grass, the echo beneath his ribs, and moved slow toward the gate. Clouds passed overhead, feathering sun across the hollow. The pain and promise braided breath by breath. Alone, yes, but not untouched, his shadow trailing long and unfamiliar over the reborn ground. The sun rising sure and silent, caught on the battered rim of the canteen in his hand. Its weight was nothing, its history was not. His fingers cracked and wind-burned, turned it, feeling the cool, familiar dent, the mark of teeth, the memory of another's thirst pressed into metal. This, more than any word, any promise, was what remained the vessel scraped dry, echoing the hush that followed after so much fury. He crossed the yard slow, each step deliberate boots, sinking deep where frost had turned ground to slurry then loam. The gatepost rose crooked above grass, flattened by horses, by watchers, by history. He paused there, head bowed beneath the open sky, letting the weight of what had passed fit itself quiet into his bones. Memory circled, a girl's trembling hand warriors ringed like the past itself, the freedom and ache of forgiveness never spoken. With a steadiness, neither boastful nor broken, he looped the strap of the empty canteen onto the rough wood, letting it sway where anyone, neighbor or stranger, friend or rival, might see. The wind shifted, and it creaked against the wood, a hollow music. He did not linger nor look for anyone to share the moment. Behind him the land was gutted clean, each scar a seed for something yet unnamed. Before him sunlight spread pale and wide, painting the canteen with promise and shadow. An invitation, a warning, a story left open for the next thirsty soul who might cross his fence.